Good morning. These Korean pilgrims are up early again this morning, and they obviously have patience because the sun took time to emerge from this cloud. Not really cloud, well, what it is, I don't know exactly physically, meteorologically, but in this very hot weather there's usually a lot of haze on the horizon in the early morning, which impedes visibility of the sunrise. But they stayed here and now they have their reward. Last night there was a wonderful moonrise as well. Hey, there's a nice picture. Touched by beauty. That's one of the great gifts of creation. Touched by beauty. So you probably have noticed that now we're reading in ordinary time after the great feast of Pentecost. We started with the Gospel of Matthew. We basically had gone through the Gospel of Mark very quickly, which is very intense. To the screen right now, above the brush. Just over from Capernaum, where I'm going to be this morning, God willing, early, with the film. Sorry folks, I cut you off there because I had to switch from Wi-Fi to data. The Wi-Fi gave out on me and my brain wasn't that alert to fix that before I started. So my apologies. Good to have you back. More than we had before we had the break. And now in contrast to yesterday, we were much earlier, and you see all these flowers are closed. And we had many of them in full bloom yesterday because I started so late. And they did not open yet because they didn't receive the light of the sun. How many people need light to open up, to blossom, to bloom, the light of the face of their parents, of their eyes, of their smile. And it brings people to blossom. You can be the sunrise for many people today. And they can open up and blossom. Where did we go, little flowers? I want to catch you. Come on. And I'll go higher. Oh, there we have you. Those these little twins here, waiting to blossom and open up fully. We're also reading from the book of Sirach, and that's our Sirachide ben Sirach, which was originally written in Hebrew by a sage in Jerusalem. And I'm particularly drawn to the reading today, kind of excited about it, because here we see the heart and soul of a person who loves, I would not just say history, but much more that family of faith to which he belongs, and he's reveling in his contemplation of God's marvelous deeds through his people throughout history. So history then is part of it because there's a record of human interaction, or God's interaction with us humans, as we absorb the gift of his revelation over time. And this record then becomes also the object of consideration and pondering. And I encourage you very much to read this book that's not included in the Hebrew canon, and many Christian churches also, because of that, failed to include it in their canon, or chose not to include it when they revised the canon at the time of the Reformation. But this was the, let's say, the spiritual environment of the time of Jesus. This book is very young. It's written less than 200 years before Jesus. And if we see, for example, Mount Tabor with Elijah there coming with Moses flanking Jesus, that very much reflects also the appreciation in which Elijah was held. Like today at the Seder in Jewish families, they are waiting for Elijah to come back. And the contemplation of the person of Elijah and God's work through him, and also through Elisha, the last words of the text today, the first half of chapter 14 of the book of Sirach, there we see a people pondering and treasuring the memory of God's work. And this is a command from the beginning, of the life of the chosen people. Tell your children's children what God did for our fathers' fathers in the desert, in Egypt, in the exile, in the whole history. Sometimes today we are disconnected from our history. Well, it's also the challenge of memory, the challenge of community memory, of a culture's memory, to ponder the treasures we have inherited. And our treasures also are a mixed bag, and there are different features that inspire, and some things that can also inspire, even if they're very negative, because we see, let's say, Joseph being sold by his brothers to Egypt. It's a very negative fact, but then it becomes part of the history of salvation, because we see how God, even through that evil, has, in those circumstances of that evil, his love didn't fail, and it continued to pump in to the hearts of his people, and he worked a plan of salvation through that for times of famine. So it's the heart that grows in this confidence in provident God, who, even through all those challenging chapters of our history, and that continues in our own personal history, that these challenges don't overpower God. No, God's gift is way beyond and above and embracing of our brokenness, of our issues, our headaches, our heartburn, our heartbreak. And his love will actually shine even more like the sun on the water. It will reflect off the human heart that's broken in a very powerful way, with redemptive love for our salvation. And in that light, I encourage you to read then the book today, the reading from the book of Sirach, and see how this sage, who is very knowledgeable of the history and makes a marvelous summary of the life of Elijah for our contemplation, for his contemplation, it's an exercise of prayer. And that's what we do when we take up the scriptures and we ponder any part of the scriptures, like Jesus teaching the Our Father today. And we bring that into prayer. And actually, that's the purpose of Jesus' teaching today, is to teach us to pray and how to pray. So that's the whole story today, really. We've been reading from the book of Kings, and that's our main thread. But if we jump into the book of Sirach, because we've closed the story of Elijah, and we're seeing God's people continuing to ponder that and to be blessed by the memory of their history and the history of God's intervention into their people, into their life. That's a great way to live, to be a contemplative soul. This is a marvelous exercise for our spiritual lives. And then one little concrete teaching, if you want something more, let's say, hands-on right now, although that's pretty hands-on as well, it would be to see the last lines of the Our Father. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And this is repeated in the text today because the evangelist Matthew brings in those words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount to emphasize a major portion of the Our Father and the urgent need we have of that gift of teaching about forgiveness. So we can do a lot of prayer, meditation, contemplation, but we can't harbor ill will against people who have hurt us and continue to pray. Because when we approach the altar with our gifts, how God, who is love, who is all forgiveness, who is all redeeming, how can we then continue into that company, into that intimacy with that all redeeming, all loving God, and still maintain and retain and harbor and even bring flames into that rancor in our hearts, that bitter experience of hurt? We have to learn to forgive, to enter into that school of forgiveness, to let that light shine in our lives, that light that we're approaching as we enter contemplation and we ponder God's work through history, to become people of great forgiveness. God bless you today. And please say a prayer for that the Holy Spirit can lead today in the development of this film on the person of Jesus in Capernaum. God bless you. See you later, alligators.